Before the break, we were having this conversation of the 5 habits of highly successful investors. And the first habit was make sure that you set aside 10% of your rent every single month so you can take care of any R&M, repairs and maintenance, that may occur on a regular basis. Greg, what's number 2?
Number two is thinking of your tenants as customers. Okay, and that dovetails really with the idea of viewing your real estate as a business as opposed to as an investment. So if you own one rental property, you have a customer that's called your tenant. You're basically your store, the asset that you rent is this property. That's your product, really. And if your attitude is when something goes wrong, the tenant is an annoyance. Well, let's put it this way. I think we've all experienced businesses that seem annoyed by their customers, haven't we? I can think of an
Yeah,
experience I had just this
absolutely.
week. Doesn't happen much in North Carolina, but once in a while. And actually, you know what? It was the post office. So that
Oh,
happens everywhere. There's a post
I
office.
mean,
But yeah,
everywhere, everywhere. I have to stand in long lines. It's terrible. They're all going out of business.
they were thoroughly annoyed by me because I had a question that wasn't the typical one. And so if you have a tenant that is renting a house from you and you think of them as a customer, a lot of things fall into place. For example, when you deal with an issue, something is broken in the house, you got to dip into your reserves and make a repair. If you're self-managing, you got to call a repairman. If you're having it from a property manager, or I'm sorry, if you have a property manager and they're doing that work for you, chances are you still have to okay it. So you have that little twinge of pain of, yeah, all right, $350 for a new garage door switch. Okay, do it, right? When you immediately remember that it's your customer, and then when you immediately remember that this investment is important to you, and this is where they live, okay, these people live there, and your garage door went off the hinges, and so their car is not in a closed garage, and their stuff is exposed to the outside. I want you to feel as guilty as anybody should feel when they get a bad customer review, right? When a restaurant gets a bad review, like I get that it's annoying. And if it's like the salmon wasn't perfect, that's one thing. But if it's like there was like stains all over the silverware, that's different. That you should feel bad about, right? There are
Right.
certain expectations of people should be able to expect some fundamentals.
That's right.
And as an owner, think of your tenants as customers and love your customers, and you'll see a lot of the little bumps in the road kind of get smoothed out because your mindset is straight.
I'm a huge believer in that, and I like the restaurant analogy, right? If you're sending out food and dirty dishes, you know what? Shame on you. You should be out of business as a restaurateur. Very similar, if your tenant isn't taken care of, and really we should just sub out the word tenant for customer. That's really what it
Yeah.
is, because just
Uh-huh.
with that just subbing out that word totally shifts your mind with how you treat this individual or this family, in which case.
Yeah,
So
instead of a landlord and a tenant, let's make it a business owner and a customer. And then all of a sudden things begin to make sense.
that's right. Cool. So number 1 on the 5 habits of highly successful investors. Number 1, setting aside 10% for repairs and maintenance. Number 2, think of your tenants as customers. Number 3, what is it?
Number three, I kind of dovetailed with treating the property like a small business, so I'm going to jump to four, and that is paying attention to the markets where the property is in. Okay, people have a tendency to say, okay, well, I got a real estate investment. I either manage it or my property manager manages it, and so I keep a peripheral view on the property to make sure I'm aware of what's happening there. Hopefully, you're doing that, but even more important, as far as I'm concerned, I'm a big believer in where over what. Okay, when you're investing in real estate, you're investing in the town where the house is, more than the house itself. There are folks who would disagree with me on that, but they would be wrong. The house is obviously important. The house is important, but I'm exaggerating only a tiny bit that winning in a real estate investment doesn't depend upon buying the perfect house. It depends upon buying a good, fairly low risk house in the right place. And so paying attention to the market is kind of like, if you live nearby, well, then you're automatically paying attention. You know if there was a scandal in the school. You know if the hospital is adding a wing. That's good. They're firing 100 nurses. That's bad. All right. You know if the mall is being shut down. You know if a mall is being added. Now, let's say you don't live there. There are very simple things you can do, like subscribing to the business journal for that area. So it'll cost you a couple of shekels a month, but you're going to get an email telling you pretty much the good news of what's happening there. Subscribing to whatever news source you can get and paying attention to what's happening in the area, because you can see forecasts coming miles away of things that are going to get better and things that are maybe going to get worse regarding population trends.
That's right. One of my favorite tricks, just to piggyback on getting good sources of information, is going to alerts.google.com and setting alerts. Say, for example, if you're interested in investing in Detroit, Michigan. So you would type in to Google Alerts, setting you a Google alert for Detroit real estate.
And you know what? That's a great suggestion.
Yeah,
you can actually go long tail.
I get news. Yeah, absolutely. Every morning I get news of what's going on in the city of Detroit. And if it's good news, bad news, I get it all.
And you can go long tail on that. Like, for example, I own stuff in Charlotte, right? I can say Charlotte real estate, but I can also say Mooresville, North Carolina City Council. I can do Mooresville, North Carolina City Council approves. All right. Now, then, when they approve a new apartment complex and it's 600 units and it's a mile from my rental, I get a notification about the approval. All right. Now, what does it mean to me if 600 rentals are being approved to be built within a mile of my rental house? That means that a whole bunch of new supply is going to be coming online in the next 2 years. Right? Might I decide I want to sell? If I was thinking about selling anyway, I might say, hey, the competition is getting too stiff for rentals around here. Let me go someplace else. Denver, North Carolina is a market not far from Mooresville, North Carolina, where the city council recently voted to put a moratorium on the building of new multifamily because they see Mooresville as being way too crowded because of all those multifamily complexes being built. And Denver, 20 miles away, said we don't want any part of that. We want to put a moratorium on high density development. If I knew those two facts, I might sell the Mooresville property and buy a property in Denver. Make sense?
So it's interesting. While you were doing that, I typed in Atlanta City Council approves, and I got a whole list of stuff. That's awesome. That's if you're listening right now, and if there's one thing that you should do is go to google.com/alerts and create a bunch of alerts for the city in which you live or for the community, right? You can even take a look at the neighborhood and then type in real estate. So here in Atlanta, I'll give you an example. You can type in Old Fourth Ward real estate, Old Fourth Ward construction, Old Fourth Ward approves. And
new jobs, companies relocating in, relocating out, that kind of finger on the pulse. And I'll tell you something that's really fun. I never thought of this before. This came up in this segment. All right. So I'm always big into the business journal. I'm big into finding ways of keeping my finger on the pulse, but I never used the Google alert. You brought up the Google alert. I brought up using the long tail of the Google alert to try to get into what's happening in the government locally and what's happening with trends. And why did we come up with this? Because it's common sense and it's new technology tools. And two guys shooting the breeze on this came up with something that's actually a breakthrough idea right there. And it happens live on the air.